Operations, discussion of the 2017-18 district calendar. Administration will update the board on the 2017-18 district calendar development. This item provides an opportunity for the board's discussion.
Superintendent Allison.
Thank you. I first want to, and I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, and we will again during budget discussions, but when we continue to get to this point in time in the year without any idea of what our budget will be, what our finances look like from a state level, it makes it very, very difficult for us to do the planning we need to do in the time frame in which it should be done. And as I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that in our budget aspects. We're into the first part of April. We do not have a school finance formula for next year. We do not have a budget that would give us an idea of what we might be receiving and how that would be dispersed. So it continues to delay conversations that typically we would need to have and would be having at this time of year. So as we think about the school calendar, changes last year to the school calendar and lengthening the school day and shortening the school year, as this board debated and had difficult decisions, to make as we got toward the end of the budget year. As we looked at the options to cut about $22 million out of our budget, the calendar was one of those areas that offsets about $3.5 million, so a significant amount. The discussion around that effort was not the academic discussion, it was around the budgetary and what choices would have been necessary had we not looked at the calendar change. Eliminating elementary librarians, outsourcing and some other aspects. So as everyone knows, we move forward with the different calendar. What I want to walk through, and I won't take you through every component of it tonight, but we did conduct a community calendar survey, and I want to give you some of the highlights. Again, just because I don't mention it doesn't mean that the information isn't important, but I know with the executive summary, this information is available to you all as well as our community. There are a couple caveats you have to remember when we talk about our school calendar and our start time, bell times, all those aspects. We have a 3-tiered transportation system. We don't have an option but to operate a 3-tiered unless we're willing to increase our transportation costs by 30 or 40%. So what that means is we pay by the bus. So they will run a first tier at 7 a.m., a second tier at 8 a.m., and a third tier at 9 a.m. So we're paying for that bus to transport 3 different sets of kids. And the difference is then we pay for the additional fuel. So if you were to try to, say, go to a 2-tier, now you're taking 450 buses, roughly 420 buses, in that third tier, which is our largest tier. So that means you're now going to have to operate about 600 buses per tier. And you could imagine the implication to those costs. So with our size and all, that is by far the most efficient way to operate our busing. But that complicates when our schools have to start, because we have to have time in between each tier to be able to drop the students off, then for those buses to move to the location for the next tier, pick students up and drop them off at school. So I think sometimes people don't understand the implications that 3-tier system has as we take a look. The other is, as we look at some of the information provided in the calendar survey, I want to be very clear, and as you look at the percentages, these percentages are based on the number of respondents to that particular question. So if you look at under conclusions, when faced with two options only, 54% of the respondents would keep the school year calendar as it is this year. That is not 54% of the 13,940. It's 54% of those that responded to that question. Our survey did not require you to complete every question to be able to submit. So what you'll see is some folks answered all the questions, some answered most of them, some may have answered only a few. And the way the survey was set up, it designated between our parents, our staff, and our students. And then depending on which you designated at the beginning of the survey, then that took you into a series of questions that, while similar, would be a little different for the student compared to the parent or the staff member. So I just want to make sure everybody understands how those percentages look. If you look at the survey basics on the executive, we had just under 14,000 different people respond, both in English and Spanish. We provided a Spanish option. 36% of those that responded were staff, 54% were parents, and about 10% were our students. And you could see the breakout of each of those groups as when you look at our employees, most of the certified employees that responded were elementary, and then you see about similar for middle school and high school, K-8. So really a pretty good mix when you look at all the secondary, middle school, high school, compared to the elementary. Elementary was a little larger than our secondary. As you move toward the interior, we ask about what were some of the impacts of the longer days. And I don't think that the responses we received were out of the norm of what many of us had heard and through those conversations. I think what it gave us an idea of was a little bit about how that was impacted and perceived, particularly by elementary versus secondary. And there definitely was a difference of how folks perceived longer days depending on which level they identified with, both with our parents and our staff and our students. So when we took a look at the impact, we know it did have an impact on curricular instruction. Teachers had commented with fewer days, trying to readjust curriculum, their scope and sequence, what they were going to teach, how they were going to teach that material. While the minutes may be similar, when you cut 15 days, it's not going to be the same. And we know that to be the case, and the survey indicates that. Did it impact students getting to school on time? That didn't seem to be an impact. Did it impact the completion of homework? Yes, we saw that from all three of our constituent groups. And we also heard that from our students with SuperSAC discussions. They said they felt like because teachers were being pushed to complete curriculum that they felt as though they were getting more homework because of that case. Instruction, amount of quality instruction during longer class periods. Again, you can see that not quite 43% of our employees and about 46% of the students felt like it did impact instruction. It's difficult when you're planning and you look at, these are all the objectives I need to accomplish, and you look at the days, and then there are things that come into play as a secondary teacher, around homecoming activities and ACT, and then you have state testing that factors into this. And I'll birdwalk a little as we talk about state testing. This year has unfortunately been no different than what we experienced last year. Constant up and down, system up and down. So I think that has a ripple effect when we're already looking at some of those shorter days. When we've stopped instruction to test and students go into test and they get started and then the system is down and they have to either come back a different day or wait for the system to come up, and not from our end but from a state end, that's a double whammy. So when we think about instructional time and then you add those types of issues into it, the fewer days definitely had an impact. If you take a look at the shorter year, the impact it had on student learning, we ask again about quality of instruction. The one thing that was fairly consistent is that one of the positives for many folks is when we take a look at the breaks. So having that extended time at Thanksgiving and then extended time at the holidays. Parents weren't quite as excited about the extended holiday time period as students and staff were. And you can imagine, particularly if you've got younger students, what you're going to have to do in daycare and those types of things. But you could see that information. We ask a number of various questions in regard to the impact, which you can see there. I did get some comments, particularly from staff, that when we asked the question about do we stay with the calendar as is from this year, or do we look at going back to a more traditional calendar, knowing that it had a $3 million budget implication, that there were folks that wanted more choices than just that too. And the practicality is we have to, those are our two choices on the table at this point in time. When we change the length of the school day by contract, that also needs to be approved by UTW. That's not bell time starting, it's the length of the school day. So any change would also require UTW to again have a vote as required by the contract. Those are really the two options we have at this stage. If you answered and selected one of those options, then it gave you the option on the open-ended comments to be able to provide input and suggestions. A lot of input, a lot of suggestions, and it's why I wanted to talk about the three-tiered bus system, because from a lot of the suggestions, that was just not a component that I think folks had considered. There has been some discussion, and we're in the process of continuing to do some research about what would happen if you moved start times up, so that particularly at the elementary, and that seemed to be a comment over and over with our elementary teachers and parents, was when the end of the day occurred. So if you were able to move the start time up by 10 or 15 minutes and be able to let the day out a little early, that was a suggestion that we saw repeatedly. We're evaluating that. Now remember, go back to the transportation component and 3 tiers, and you've got to have the time between the tiers to be able to pick up and deliver the students and get them to school on time. So transportation is in that process of taking a look at it. We know it would have an impact of most likely increasing the number of buses that we would need when you're shortening, say, from 60 minutes to 50 minutes in between. And that's a pretty labor-intensive analysis. Transportation has to look at all the various runs and the pickup locations, the drop-off, and what that looks like, not just this year, but past years, to give us an idea. We'll have that information fairly soon, so we can look at what the impact to transportation would be. The other side of that is there was an article in the paper about a national bus driver shortage, across the country. So that's a concern. Why we may be able to add the buses, if we don't have the drivers, that then has the ripple effect of where we've run into several instances this year with the shortage of drivers, then struggling to get pickups done and delivery of students. When you're also running a lot of sub-drivers, they're not as familiar with the routes. So it's going to take a little longer, and we've just eliminated that margin of error potentially. So while it sounds very simple, there's a lot of analysis that we need to take a look at to come to that conclusion, and then we'll be able to come back to you with, is that a viable option? The struggle again is without knowing what our finances will look like moving forward, what the implications would be on changing the current longer day, shorter year calendar back to what we had done more traditionally. The longer we push off that decision, the more implications it has for not only logistics from schoolmaster schedules to finance and in budgeting, parents not knowing exactly when, and our staff when school would start, when school would end, what those breaks look like. So there is a definite ripple effect as we move later into the year on what that does to all of those aspects as we delay taking a look at the calendar. But given the financial issues, that's something that, given a little more time, hopefully we'd get some clarity out of Topeka. But we reach a point in time, if there's no clarity when they come back first after their spring break here pretty quick, then we may have to make a decision and move forward without knowing exactly what the finance piece is. We do know it will have an impact. If we make a change from what we did this year to the calendar, we'll have to address that in our budgeting process.
Betty?
John, remind me again, we did this survey, was that prior to the change in daylight savings or after? I can't remember.
It's at the beginning of March.
I don't remember when daylight savings, does anybody?
First
weekend in March.
Okay.
And we did this, so that would have been prior to the change or during the change?
Or right after.
Right after. And I
Or in the middle of
can't
one of the
help but
two.
wonder, when you look at some of the questions about being tired, I was tired. There are other variables that could have an impact on how the question was answered, and I just kind of wondered about that.
I think there's the potential of a lot of variables, and what we saw as you look at the percentages in the data is it is mixed. Different aspects impacted different employee groups or students differently. In some cases, the positives around the breaks, and in other cases, whether it was homework or instruction time, those types of aspects, we definitely had mixed opinions. So good information as we consider. I think it's important to point out this was last spring what was considered to be the lesser of the evils on what we were going to have to do when we addressed that budget shortfall, and we'll have to take that into consideration again as we contemplate moving forward. And Ms. Johnson just said that it occurred after daylight savings. Am I correct, or before?
Daylight savings occurred after the survey was done.
After the survey. Okay, I misread that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Jeff?
I know we're under the gun to get a calendar set. Do you have any idea when you and your staff think you'll bring this back to us for
I think we need to finish the transportation analysis, and I wouldn't say at this point in time that the next board meeting we come back with definitive approval of a calendar, but I think giving you all an opportunity to look at the information, for us to do that analysis and to look at some of the comments and suggestions that were made. We'll very possibly talk about that at our next meeting, but it may be May before we bring a proposal back for an actual selection.
when is the latest that we can set a calendar?
That's a question we've been taking a look at. Technically, you could set the calendar, in late May or June. The issue is all those those implications. Unknown for family, unknown for staff, what that does for budgeting, for scheduling, on enrollment dates, start dates, all those aspects. So that, if you ask the schools at this point in time, they would have told you they would have liked to have had it in January. And I think most of us would like to have had that, but with the continued unknowns around budget, that just makes it a much more difficult decision than it typically would be as we think about what the calendar looks like.
Lynn?
I would just remind the board that the earliest Topeka will determine anything on school finance would be May 15th. We don't go back until May 1st. And to get it done by May 15th would really be an astronomical miracle. So if I was a betting person, I would say closer to June 1 to June 15th. So we really won't know finances really for a month, 2 months. And so that's just dropped a little good news for you. So.
Mr. Good News Man.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Joy?
Just a couple of comments. Yes, it's disheartening that we don't know where we are yet, but it is important for the legislature to take time and put the right formula in place and get this right. And I think it's never safe to assume anything, but given the court order, then we should expect to see some even minor increase for next year. Now, we don't know if that meets, we're going to hear in a few minutes all kinds of stuff about budget, and we don't know if that covers things, but that is something important to consider when we think about these kind of two options we've talked about. And then I think just the third thing that really wasn't kind of in the executive summary, but Ms. Johnson, thank you for providing the raw data and speaking with Superintendent Allison about that. When you look at this from an educational impact, which is what our primary goal is as a board, and I know you all are, that's very important to everyone here. When we look at the question about lengthening the school day and shortening the school year having a positive impact on students' education, only about 15% of our surveyors, of our respondents, thought that it had a positive impact on the education of our students. Only about 15%. And so when we really look at the impact we're having on education, on our employees and their workload, on the community and family, strengthening families, and this decision, while probably the worst of, or the best of the worst cases, has had a very negative impact on our community as a whole for a lot of people. Not everyone, but for a lot of people. And so I think as we move forward, I guess I would just caution us on putting ourselves too quickly into, we have to do this again before we see a little bit more about where we might end up before the end of the year, and look for some other options and some other ways around it, because it has been, I think the data was pretty, I think when we hired Dr. Thompson, we had 3,000 people respond, and we asked about the school day, and we got almost 14,000 people responding. That shows there's a lot of interest in this topic. People are laughing. Yes, there's a lot of interest because it has had such an impact on our community in so many different ways. Thank you.
I just want to make sure, if we keep the same calendar, we're looking at having to find $3 million. Correct?
No, if we would not keep the same calendar.
I'm
Yes,
sorry.
I
Yes,
think
I
that's
worded
what you
that
meant.
backwards.
Yep.
If we move back to the old calendar, we have to find $3 million. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if we kept the calendar that we had this year, but adjusted times by whatever you're going to bring a report back to us, we're pretty sure we would have to add buses. Correct?
Yes, we believe that would be the case.
Okay, but we currently are not using all the buses that we have budgeted for, correct?
Because of our vendor being unable to find the number of drivers we would have liked,
Right.
we have not been able to put as many buses into circulation as we would have liked this year.
Yeah. And I think our vendor is trying to correct that by raising salaries and doing some things.
They are. We've had ongoing discussions that that needed to be corrected for next year.
Okay, so all of those are the pieces that you're planning to have your team bring back for us?
Yes.
Okay, because I agree with everybody around the table. You know, this is a decision that, although I would love to have a calendar, in fact, I was in a building today and in fact, I had two people, but one of them were very adamant. They need a calendar and they need it now. And I said, well, I understand that, but we're not voting on it tonight because we've got to get the right information to make sure we make the right decisions because there are consequences both ways, whatever we decide. Lynn? Oh, I'm sorry. It's Betty. I apologize. I can't read now. Sorry, Betty.
Thank you. Actually, I really wanted to add on to some comments that Joy made, because it's worthwhile to point out that loss of money has impacted a lot of areas. And when we looked at this, it really wasn't from a perspective of, is this going to be perfect or fix all? It really was kind of a temporary idea. I just like to remind the public that the board certainly was not trying to do something that would meet with such great negativity. We were forced to try and find $3 million. In fact, money wherever we could to save that. And so I just think that it should be noted that really was the intent of what do we do to survive this financial disaster. And that's all that it was about. It did create a hardship for a lot of people, but loss of funding created a great hardship as well. It's just worth keeping that in mind, that really was the intent. We knew it was going to be a hardship going forward, but we're just in a survival mode.
Mike?
You know, I've looked and listened to the results, and you know, as I look at this and I think about it, we did this last year, as everybody said. It's a $3 million savings, and that was a good thing for what we did. It saved jobs and it saved positions, and it made us go forward. And as I think about it now, in retrospect, this is a point in time. We've spent 1 year studying it. We've had a very good survey to know what the input was, but it's one point in time. Maybe we have actually found something that not only saves us money, but is a better way to educate our children, and we don't know that yet, in my mind, because we need more data to support that. This may be very innovative that the staff came up with that we don't even know. And yeah, the first year it's always the toughest. Any change is tough because we don't know what we're coming into. But if we don't change and look at different things and then analyze them correctly, you know, maybe this is a good thing where with a better budget, we're still saving $3 million and not giving it to transportation, but we're putting those dollars back into the classroom and building a better classroom and maybe more teachers, more paras with $3 million or other things that we can do with it. You know, I'm not prepared to, after 1 year, say, you know, we've got some parents that are mad, and I've heard them talk too, heard parents that are happy with it. That tells me that we're not sure. You know, we're kind of in between, and I think we need to study this a little bit more. And honestly, I'd like to see it go another year and see what happens, because as people understand the philosophies of it, the longer day, the longer class period, the more contact time, the less days, it may be a smarter thing to do. We don't know. And if we throw it away now and we throw away $3 million, we could be in trouble.
Joy?
Just two quick responses. Ms. Arnold, I agree with you. And I've had a lot of parents say, last year, I thought this was the best option, but now that I've lived it, I realize how it really impacts my family. And And I'm one of the, I'm just going to say, I'm one of those that it's impacting because, and you and I both have children in school. And there's a lot of things in the survey that aren't addressed, like my student had homework all spring break trying to catch up and stay where they were last year. He had homework all over Christmas break. Long extra break? No, we had an extra week of homework. We had extra homework in November. And my first thought was, what's going on? I don't understand why we have all these extra projects going on this year. And then my husband clued me in, hey, you guys increased the school day, shortened the year, there's fewer class periods, and so they're trying to fill this in and get the same things for your students, even though some things they have had to cut out. And so to me, it's fairly obvious looking at the system that our education of our students is not as good as it could be with the 15 fewer days. I love long contact time. I would love to have 15 more days with 7.5 hours a day where kids get out at 3:30 in an ideal world. That's not the world we live in, so I'd like to find the right mix of that. But sending kids all this extra homework home and giving all this extra stuff and seeing kindergartners get off a bus at 5:15, 5:30 every night, I don't think that fits our community values personally. So, thank you.
Okay. I'm seeing no other discussion, and I look forward to the next board meeting when we'll have more information.